Linda's second talk. Uh, Pedro had done his first talk last week. So I'm going to just hand it over to Linda so we can get started.
Thank you very much, Ananya, and good evening to you all. I think it's evening for everybody. Just before I begin this session, I wanted to share a little bit of some information which Michael Gomes very kindly shared with me some hours ago in relation to the voice of the silence. And this is just a sort of a passing remark, but a point of interest, I think. He mentioned that in 1889, Madame Blavatsky sent Bertram Keatley, her private secretary, to America for a lecture tour of the United States. And he told a Mr. Abbott Clark, who gave a White Lotus Day talk in 1946, that he was, as part of his work, to meet all of Madame Blavatsky's personal students and charge them that living a theosophic life, embodying theosophy and its ethics, its moral conduct, etc., was the key to all esoteric knowledge. Furthermore, and this is a really interesting statement, he wrote, "We were told to tell our members," and I presume this is from Bertram Keatley, that from members and the public from HPB, that the voice of the silence was in fact the key to understanding the secret doctrine. And she said that you might learn the whole of the secret doctrine by heart, and that if you did not incorporate in your thought and feeling and your life the ethics of compassion as taught in the voice of the silence, you would turn out to be only an intellectual pratyeka or a black magician. But on the other hand, and this is very interesting, she said, if you could not get anything out of the secret doctrine but a headache, and it is quite a work, if you lived the life of impersonality and compassion, you would be safely on the path of compassion that leads to the perfection of human evolution. So I thought that was a really interesting piece of information to have. And that I think underscores the incredible importance of the voice of the silence in HPB's mind, something which complements the secret doctrine because it is very much centered on living a theosophic life. So just wanted to share that with you. I'm going to share the screen now. And Ananya, I thought perhaps for the hour and a half, I could use that time showing slides, speaking and asking for a few comments from time to time as well, instead of, say, reserving questions for the end. So we can just proceed through these and see how we go. Okay, so we're going to focus on the secret path today as one of two essential choices open to humanity in terms of spiritual unfoldment. We're going to begin by reviewing very briefly a slide from the last session with some points about the secret path, also known as the doctrine of the heart, soul wisdom, the path of woe, the steeper path that leads to the paramita heights, the Mahayana ideal of the Bodhisattva is really enshrined in the Bodhisattva path, which is also the secret path. Other terms which are used are the path of we could say true occultism, the secret science, Gupta Vidya. And then we had 2 schools in the Zen tradition, including the Sung Men, which is the esoteric school. And I also noted in the previous session that in Vedanta, we also find this path. And I'd like to move now to a couple of examples of the secret path in Vedanta. First of all, here is a quotation from the Chandogya Upanishad, which I like very much. I return to it quite often. The self resides within the lotus of the heart. Knowing this, consecrated to the self, the sage enters daily that holy sanctuary. The sage enters daily that holy sanctuary. Do you have any brief remarks about that? Any responses? Just put up the hand icon if you have something to say. Pablo.
In the first fragment, there are mentions to the heart and to retiring consciousness to the heart. So this is quite appropriate for the first fragment too. Very nice quote.
Yeah. It is. And we can think that also one enters the true self at a point when the personal self ceases to exist in that moment. And when that happens, love is not partial. It's not directed to our favorite people, those who are close to us or whatever, but rather it becomes universal in that moment. And consequently, compassion can be expressed more easily. This passage refers to a sage entering daily that holy sanctuary. And yet, at whatever stage we are, whether or not we consider ourselves to be a sage, a daily reflection on who we are at some point, a daily reminder to ourselves of who we truly are, is definitely beneficial. The lotus of the heart does not refer to the physical heart as such. Rather, it refers to the location of the Anahata chakra, which is located in the etheric matter just outside the physical body in the region of the heart. We can think of the true self as occupying a significantly deeper field of consciousness, sort of around that central location, if we're thinking in terms of locating it physically, because there is that connection to the heart center in the physical body. But in any case, just a passing warning against meditating on the heart itself, which can even produce unwanted effects such as palpitations. We are talking about a spot which is just outside the physical body. So this entering into the self, the true self, is a state of very deep consciousness. Another statement here on realizing the self from the Mundaka Upanishad. The self is not to be known through study of the scriptures, nor through subtlety of the intellect, nor through much learning. It's a very strong statement. It's not to be known through those things, but by him who longs for him is he known. Verily unto him does the self reveal his true being. I'm using all of the original wording in the quotations in this course. These days we would be using perhaps masculine and feminine. but this is the original translation which I'm using here. So there's this sense of longing for our true self. So we can't know that intellectually through studying scriptures or anything else like that. And verily unto him, that is him who longs for that connection, that true being is revealed. So I thought those two selections just gave a bit of a sense of the secret path in the Vedanta tradition. And of course, we have At the Feet of the Master as well, as conveyed to the young J. Krishnamurti, being this translation into English of a number of Sanskrit terms from that tradition. The 4 basic qualifications for the path will be quite familiar, no doubt, in English: discrimination, or if you like, discernment, spiritual discernment, desirelessness, good conduct, and love. So we just see this tradition coming out in different ways, or this path rather coming out in different ways in these traditions. Now, the Sanskrit term mumuksha here is translated as love. Sometimes it's called mumukshutva. And for Shankaracharya, this was the aspiration to know one's true self. That aspiration. There needs to be some kind of inner pull to know who one really is. It has also been rendered as the intense desire for liberation from the rounds of birth and death, the intense desire for union with God, or we can think of it as union with the divine, union with all of life. So this is very important, that love has this special place in At the Feet of the Master. And there's a text later on in this book which really brings out evidence, further evidence, that this is an approach to the secret path. It says, "For if you yearn to be one with God, it is not for your own sake." Again and again, we come back to motive. It is that you may be a channel through which his love may flow to reach your fellow men. He who is on the path exists not for himself, but for others. He's forgotten himself in order that he may serve them. He is as a pen in the hand of God, yet at the same time also a living plume of fire, raying out upon the world the divine love which fills his heart. So we see the importance of this longing, this process, being part of something in us which wants to share with others, not to appropriate something for ourselves, as it were. And one exists on the path not for oneself, but for others. And ultimately is actually able to forget himself or herself in order to serve. So again, we see this principle in At the Feet of the Master. Any brief comments on this one before we proceed? Ananya.
I was just observing that there needs, it all seems to point to this sense of being, of complete humility and sort of a softness like a vulnerability to be able to be even close to having this type of the movement toward that divinity, because we have to move toward it in order for it to meet us.
Thank you.
Like the pen as a pen in the hand of God, that is just such a beautiful phrase right there.
Yeah, it is lovely. Idamas and then Maria. I don't know whether Idamas needs to unmute.
Idamas, can you?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I just wondered if we can have a copy of this incredibly beautiful excerpts.
A copy of these excerpts.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to share the slides afterwards. I could send them to Ananya if people are interested in reviewing them. That would be fine.
They're just beautiful.
Okay. Maria.
I was just thinking about how sensitive this individual needs to be, because in order to exist not for ourselves but for others, we need to be sensitive to the extraordinarily sensitive to all the life around us, to know what the need is, and then to realize at some very deep level that what they need is just what we need. That's what the world seems to need at the moment, even though it is a mystery to us why we have been brought in a certain place at a certain time and enduring maybe working at our edges a good deal of struggle. So
Yeah.
the path of woe is certainly one in which there is a great sensitivity to, not necessarily to intense suffering, but to need.
Absolutely, thank you. And we'll come back to woe again a little bit later on too. All right, I'd like to proceed now and move to the voice of the silence, and wanted to mention as just an additional comment really, the question of the authenticity of the voice of the silence. I think Pedro mentioned in his first class how in the Tibetan tradition each text is to be valid, if you like, is rooted in a Mula Shastra, or a root text. And in this case, the book of the Golden Precepts, from which the voice of the silence is derived, has not actually, to my knowledge, been produced. But its authenticity as a Mahayana text, or at least having a Mahayana flavor, has been affirmed by a number of prominent Buddhists. First of all, we had the Panchen Lama, the second most important person in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, in 1927, describing the voice of the silence as the only true exposition in English of the heart doctrine of the Mahayana and its noble ideal of self-sacrifice for humanity. D.T. Suzuki, the well-known Buddhist scholar, here is the real Mahayana Buddhism, with an exclamation mark, quite enthusiastic. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama, regarding the 1982 edition, saying he was happy to have this long association with the Theosophists and to learn about the centenary edition. He said he believed this book has strongly influenced many sincere seekers and aspirants to the wisdom and compassion of the Bodhisattva path. And he was hoping it would benefit more people. I just thought that was something that was interesting to note, because these manuscripts of the Book of the Golden Precepts, by all accounts, are quite archaic. Now, more on the voice of the silence. We touched on this verse in the last session, but I want to bring it up again and point to a couple of things. Generally speaking, with this work, the voice of the silence, one can go into it again and again and again and read the same verse, and there may be new insights from that. And that was this one, introducing the idea of the two paths in one, the truth unveiled about the secret heart, who shall first hear it? The law which shunning learning teaches wisdom reveals a tale of woe, and the secret heart, says the footnote, is the esoteric doctrine. So I've got a couple of points to consider here. One is, why is head learning shunned in favor of soul wisdom? Something for you to think about, but I'll bring out a few things about this. And that is that head learning is something which tends to occur in the realm of physical time. We are doing it in this whole context of time. It's concerned with memory, it's concerned with gathering information, retention of facts, and so forth, and interpretation perhaps of information as well. Soul wisdom, on the other hand, refers to something which emerges from deep within us. And I would suggest that it's a wisdom which emerges from out of time as we know it. Something which is somehow also the distillation or essence of experience. It's a wisdom which can provide true meaning to life, including meaning within information that we gather around us. And if we're sensitive, and this word sensitivity comes up again, Maria, also, if we are sensitive to our inner promptings, then we do help this wisdom to find its completion through the way that we act at all times. So that's one thing. Secondly, the nature of woe. So woe has been described as deep suffering, as affliction, as grief as well. It can be thought of in different ways. We discussed that a bit in the previous session. And so we read here in fragment 2, but path the second is renunciation, and therefore called the path of woe. So we have the candidate for woe. We have this rather heavy feeling with this concept. So a question arises: how do woes manifest for one who is treading the secret path? I would suggest that there may be numerous smaller renunciations, a life which becomes accustomed to giving. That's another way of thinking about renunciation actually, as giving rather than taking. There are personal sacrifices. There may be pain in different ways. We can think of renunciation as even renunciation, in a sense, the strong activity of the kleshas, those tendencies which we all have. They're enumerated in the yoga tradition. So we have ignorance, we have egoism, attraction, repulsion, and Abhinavesha, this wish for continuity of life and possibly a fear of death, or just wish for continuity generally. These sorts of things need to become more subdued. There's a sense in which we can consider that the individual on the path needs to subdue those clashes so that the inner consciousness can come through more. And also we can think about woe as suffering generally, and from a greater degree of sensitivity to the suffering in the world, which can be quite painful, culminating in the ultimate renunciation of nirvana, and that is a huge one. There are people who cannot watch the news. They find it too difficult looking at the suffering in the world, or can only watch a certain amount of news. It can be quite unsettling. And the more sensitive one is, the more difficult that can be sometimes to look at, because a lot of the news tends to be negative and dramatic and involves suffering as well. It's interesting when we think of the subject of suffering. In the Buddhist tradition, the Lord Buddha spoke of 3 kinds of dukkha. Dukkha, a word which can be translated as suffering, but is also thought of as unsatisfactoriness, which in a way is a more objective way of thinking about the concept, because suffering is quite a loaded term. He talked about the physical and mental pain from the inevitable stresses of life, such as old age, sickness, and death. He spoke of the distress that we feel as a result of impermanence and change, such as the pain of failing to get what we want and of losing what we hold dear. I'm sure we can relate to these things. And thirdly, a kind of existential suffering from living a conditioned existence and being subject to rebirth, the angst of being human. Do you have any responses to those, one or more of those 3 kinds of dukkha or suffering? Yes, Maria. I think you need to unmute.
We have been given the golden stairs by one of the masters of wisdom as something to consider as a way of life that helps to lessen the sense of self preoccupation, and to help us also, especially the last, when we are to keep in mind before the eye human progress and perfection. So we have within us a path that enables us to endure a little something of what we're being called to face, without turning away, without closing down the heart, but to keep the mind and the heart open to what is before us, not necessarily to be obsessive about progress or seeking, but simply to be present for life in a new way.
Thank you. Just looking at this list here, I think the first 2 types of dukkha or suffering are fairly straightforward. this existential suffering from living a conditioned existence and being subject to rebirth, this angst, it says, of being human, is a broader kind of suffering. And I guess as one comes closer to this secret path and moves along it, this can be perhaps more readily understood. And there is this longing to not only, I guess, find our true self, but to abide in it more and more. And I guess having a physical body can be seen as something which has its own challenges and difficulties, and that there needs to be there are certain things to be done in the physical world. Energy needs to be put into physical living, which would take away from that too. So one can imagine ultimately when one has gone through numerous experiences in different incarnations, that there would be this letting go. But in the meantime, there are wonderful things about living in the world as well, and they pull us back again and again, as well as old ties with people. So just wanted to share that. I want to talk a little bit about helping to alleviate suffering, and refer for a moment to the little book Light on the Path, which speaks of the helplessness of those who have seen no light, whose souls are in profound gloom. It says, try to lift a little of the heavy karma of the world. Give your aid to the few strong hands that hold back the powers of darkness from obtaining complete victory. And this is quite powerful, really. I would suggest that this last statement is a reference to this Kali Yuga, one of those immensely long epochs in which there's relative spiritual darkness, and yet at the same time also the potential for more rapid development for those who have the commitment and the intent to serve humanity. And there's also, of course, a reference to this guardian wall, I think in the third fragment of the Voice of the Silence too, that there is this wall of protection around humankind. And this is actually a very kind of reassuring teaching, because sometimes one can look at the world and just wonder about what seems to be a lot of chaos at times. And yet this says that it's taught that the accumulated efforts of long generations of yogis, saints, and adepts have created, so to say, a wall of protection around mankind, which shields mankind invisibly from still worse evils. And that's something which I think we can really take to heart. And we need to, I guess, sense for ourselves whether there seems to be truth in this. As with all of these teachings which approach divine wisdom in various ways. And if we can't prove something, if we don't have hard evidence of it, is it something with which we resonate, which speaks to us, which we somehow sense to be true, and if not, something that can be set aside. So, another question. Why do you think it is called the secret path? Interesting use of terminology. Yes, Sue.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's secret in that it can't be described. It can't be put into words. It's intuitive. And I also think that it's secret in that it's within us. And like the St. John of the Cross, he has a wonderful poem, The Dark Night of the Soul, and he's going down secret steps. And so we really are going down secretly or going into ourselves secretly. You know, there's not a pathway that we're seeing. It's all intuitive at a higher level. So it is secret. Maybe the word hidden is a good word for it. Over.
Thank you very much. A few more thoughts about this. With spiritual advancement comes power, which may be misused by one who is not morally prepared. So certain teachings are simply not given out until the individual is ready to receive them. Clara Codd said that the disciples' awakened spiritual perception shows the spiritual darkness in which most people live. So she was sort of equating this secret path with an awakened spiritual perception, really. And again, yes, it comes back to the individual, and the individual has to be in a certain state of receptivity, a certain state of wakefulness, I guess. And this statement by her might sound quite dramatic if we happen to move in social service circles with people who are not so spiritually aware, but we may not even realize the extent of this darkness at times. So that's another point. Also, a footnote in The Voice of the Silence says the open and the secret path, or the one taught to the layman, the exoteric and generally accepted, and the other, the secret path, the nature of which is explained at initiation. So again, we have this sense of certain things which are not divulged until the disciple is ready. Swami T. Subbarao called this path a precipitous path, with the adept or spiritual teacher directing toward the chela, the disciple, various occult forces, enabling that individual to obtain prematurely a knowledge of their spiritual nature. So to be able to do this, one needs very solid, firm moral preparation. Now, in relation to the subject of initiation, I've just got 3 slides here. I'm only going to show them in passing. That's not the main focus of this course, but just to show how initiations are represented in the traditions of Buddhism and Vedanta, and that there are terms there. That first initiation, Shrotapati in Buddhism, Parivrajika in the system of Shankaracharya. And then we have 2 more terms for the second initiation, as it's called, Sakridagamin in Buddhism, one who receives birth only once more, Kutichaka by Shankaracharya, the man who builds a hut, or if you like, the individual who builds a hut. In Buddhism, the Anagaman, one who will be reincarnated no more except by free will, or Hamsa, a stage when one reaches unity. the Arhat in Buddhism, one who is worthy, or Paramahansa. Shankaracharya, Hamsa is swan. So here we have the supreme swan. It's quite beautiful, really, when you think about it. Imagine a swan in flight. Has attained the highest spiritual realization, symbol of divine discrimination, realization of the true self. So we just looked at the Paramahansa and then the Asheka or adept in Buddhism, one with no more to learn, who's exhausted the possibilities of the human kingdom, which is almost unfathomable, really, or a Jivan Mukta, a free being who's liberated. In the Masters on the Path, Mr. C.W. Leadbeater went on to list 4 further initiations, that of the Buddha being at the level of the 8th, and of a Bodhisattva at the level of the 7th. But as I say, this is just mentioned as something virtually in passing, just to show how there are certain ways of thinking about these developmental stages in these 2 great traditions. Now we come to an important concept, which is that of discernment and choice. We mentioned discernment a little bit in the first class, and it's a preliminary qualification. It needs to be practiced all along the way in this path as well. It implies discernment, really a new level of clarity about life, real spiritual discernment. It's quite extraordinary, and one can really, I guess, tell between what is important and what is not. Sometimes we get so immersed in certain things and we consider them to be important, but when we step back, or with the passage of time, we realize, in fact, they were not necessarily so important after all. There is this clearer discernment. In the voice of the silence, we have, search for the paths, but, O Lanu, be of clean heart before thou startest on thy journey, before thou takest thy first step. Learn to discern the real from the false, the ever-fleeting from the everlasting, and above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the eye from the heart doctrine. And then it says, great sifter is the name of the heart doctrine, O disciple. And this is quite interesting. The doctrine of the heart can be sensed by a discerning mind, the mind which is free from both ignorance and illusion. The spiritual individual cannot run away from choice and needs the courage to make the right choice or the best choice amid the ever-changing circumstances of life. So we can ask the question, well, suppose we have an important decision to make in life. How do we know if we've actually made the right choice about something? Any thoughts? How do we actually know? Maria. You need to unmute.
Much of it is about being more aware of and skilled in linking cause and effect. It's not a matter of knowing anything for sure, but having a sense of what is working in one's life and one's organization, and doing the best we can from what we perceive, knowing that the bigger picture is beyond us at this point, and that we still have much to understand.
Thank you. Yadamas.
I think that it's happened to me a couple of times in this life to make very important decisions about what to do. And I felt that it was in my heart, whatever my heart was telling me was the thing to do. And I had no hesitation. It just happened. It just happened naturally. If we can do it properly, I'm not sure that I can't describe what happened, but it
You
happened.
said it was in your heart, yes.
Yes, it happened when I left my very good paying job and I decided to follow my heart, and I knew that I'd be poor for the rest of my life, and I haven't regretted it.
Thank you. Actually, I'm reminded here of a friend of mine who had an important decision to make. And she mentioned this to Mrs. Radaji, and the reply was, follow your heart. Follow your heart. And this is no doubt not referring to some emotional whim, but deeply inside what your I guess higher nature tells you. Yes. Another comment? Rosie, is it? Yes.
This is such an interesting question. I agree with everything that's been said. And the idea of following our heart, I think it's also possible that we can follow our heart and make a decision. And then things may still not turn out the way that we hoped. Things might not turn out from the perspective of the personality very well at all. But that doesn't mean necessarily that it was the wrong decision. So it seems as though there's an element of maybe stepping back and realizing we don't see the greater picture. And maybe some of these decisions aren't really about us at all.
Thank you, Rosie. That's really interesting. One more comment from Carol, and then we'll move on.
I was just kind of what Rosie just said, that the right choice is going to be the unselfish choice. The choice that's for the greater good, and to think in those terms all the time as much as we can.
Thank you. I would just add one thing also. Sometimes there is a substantial choice to make in life, and even though there may be obstacles and there may be difficulties and others may judge us, and we know that that will happen, there may be a very deep and unerring sense of rightness about that. So I think that's something we need to be able to listen to inside ourselves. And Rohit Mehta mentioned that in terms of right choice, it may mean sometimes refraining from activity or sometimes plunging into activity. So it may be a choice just not to act on something. It's a very interesting area to consider. In relation to choice itself, Joy Mills, in her book From Inner to Outer Transformation, mentioned that Tsongkhapa suggested we must begin with my present unique occasion. My present unique occasion. I think that's a wonderful phrase. That to preserve our humanity, we are under obligation to act in every moment in a human manner. and that the paths to be searched for are within us. We can only begin where we are. The challenge is that the Bodhisattva goal must be intentionally present before us all the time and direct all our actions. So she said we're to give up a life of self-centeredness. This comes back to Carol's response, which is full of suffering because it is compounded by desire. And I thought that was nice, particularly beginning with my present unique occasion. We can only, we have this moment, the past is gone, the future has yet to unfold, but what is happening right now? And we have choices, larger and smaller choices, so often during life, so we can follow those according to what we think is appropriate. Now I want to turn briefly to something that Swami T. Subbarao mentioned in his esoteric writings, which is a very real warning. He said this path is eminently dangerous to those who do not hold the talisman, which ensures safety, which is a perfectly unselfish, self-forgetting, self-annihilating devotion to the religious good of mankind, think humankind, a self-abnegation which is not temporal, but must have no end forever, and the object of which is the religious enlightenment of the human race. It's a tremendous level of altruism. He said, without this talisman, this pure unselfishness, although the progress may be rapid for a period of time, a point will come where that upward advance will be arrested, real moral worth will tell, and one who progressed along that slow and steady path, the open path, may be the first to merge himself in the light of the Logos. So I just thought I'd mention that this question of unselfishness comes up again and again on this journey. And of course, to underscore all of this, HPB wrote in an article which appeared in the Path, and probably elsewhere as well, I'm sure, she made it very clear that in the early days of the TS, 72 individuals put themselves forward as candidates for Path, but only 3 did not fail, and only 1 of them actually succeeded. And that was the level of difficulty. We know that the voice of the silence is written for the few, for the very few. It's beautiful, it's enriching, it's uplifting, it's inspiring, all of that. It's also hard work. I want to turn now to very broadly trace a process which is part and parcel of the secret path, and that is from renunciation to the attainment of transcendental virtues. And I want to start by sharing a little Zen story with you. Nan-in, a Japanese master during the Meiji era, received a university professor who came to inquire about Zen. Nan-in served tea. He poured his visitor's cup full and then kept on pouring. The professor watched the overflow until he could no longer restrain himself. It is over full, no more will go in. Like this cup, Nan-in said, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup? A nice story, just a nice illustration, something that we can, images can help a lot when we are understanding certain concepts. And I think that's a really nice image of that overflowing cup and the pouring that just kept on and on and on. And that's a bit like us. So renunciation in the voice of the silence is interesting. we need to come to some kind of understanding of certain things which need to be discarded. We have in verses 144 and 145 two really important verses. To live to benefit mankind is the first step. To practice the 6 glorious virtues is the second. But then to reach nirvana's bliss, but to renounce it is the supreme, the final step, the highest on renunciation's path. And therefore, we find these 3 steps of renunciation: to live to benefit mankind, to live to benefit humanity. True occultism or theosophy is the great renunciation of self, said HPB. And presumably here the self in capital letters is referring to the personal self. Unconditionally and absolutely, in thought as in action. Very, very difficult, this. Not for himself, but for the world he lives. A chela has to become a mere beneficent force in nature. And then she said it's impossible to employ spiritual forces if there is the slightest tinge of selfishness remaining in the operator. So again, we come back to the need to drop selfishness, or at least to transcend it, to start. We need to understand it and gradually work with that and what it means and how we can move into a different state. But to live to benefit mankind, to practice the 6 glorious virtues or the paramitas, which we'll look at briefly, is the second stage. And really they will start to naturally flourish as other things subside of a personal nature. And then to reach nirvana's bliss, but to actually renounce it is the supreme and final step. So, renunciation. We can think also in terms of occultism, the term occultism as renunciation as well. So we have this statement by HPB in Practical Occultism about becoming this beneficent force in nature, which is, and she's talking about a force, a beneficent force, not just a beneficent individual, but like a force for good in the order of things, which is quite amazing. So in the East, occultism is called Gupta Vidya or secret knowledge. And HPP defined it as the science of life, the art of living. She said it's not the acquirement of powers, whether psychic or intellectual, although both are its servants. Neither is occultism the pursuit of happiness, as man, or we can say as we understand the word. For the first step is sacrifice, the second renunciation. So again, this sense of woe comes in. It is not about the pursuit of happiness. Sacrifice and renunciation being extremely important. So the paramitas, those transcendental virtues, that second of the 3 parts of the process of renunciation in the voice of the silence. It's a bit paradoxical in a way, because on the one hand, the personal nature is sublimated more and more, but on the other hand, some very beautiful qualities arise, and these are brought out very much in the Buddhist tradition. In the Mahayana tradition, typically there are 6 transcendental virtues. In the Theravada tradition, typically 10. In the Voice of the Silence, HPB added virag as well, this fourth quality here. So here we have dana, this charity or love immortal. They get, I guess, in a sense, deeper and more rich and perhaps more difficult to fulfill as we go along. This shila, harmony in word and act, or purity. They're also called the perfections in Buddhism. So the perfection of generosity is the first one. The perfection of morality is the second. Then we have that patience which cannot be ruffled, the perfection of patience. Then HPB's addition, this indifference to pleasure and pain, divine indifference, also known as vairagya. Virya, this dauntless energy to lead one towards truth, the perfection of energy in Buddhism, in the Mahayana tradition. Dhyana, the perfection of meditation, state of being inwardly awake, ceaseless contemplation of the real. So these are transcendental virtues. They are of a really high order. In a certain way, we can understand them from where we are at a certain level, and yet there are tremendous depths to these. And then prajna, the perfection of wisdom, which has been described as omniscience, the knowledge of every aspect of reality, the final goal and the effect of practicing the perfections. There are different lists of these perfections in Buddhism, in the Theravada tradition. We have, for example, some are similar, but others are different. I won't use the technical terms, but generosity, morality, renunciation, insight, energy, patience, truthfulness, resolution, loving kindness, and equanimity. But here I've given them the parameters as they are brought out in the Voice of the Silence. Now, we've talked about woes, we've talked about suffering, and considered some of the tremendous challenges that we have in all of this. Before we move on at this stage, does anyone have any comment to make? Okay. What I want to do now is move to an aspect of this path which I think is very real and can grow more and more amid suffering, difficulties, some hastened karma, things which seem to be inconvenient, things which seem to be annoying because we've made a certain decision to proceed in a certain way. Amidst all of that, I would suggest there is real joy in the secret path. And that the further one travels along it, or if you like, the further one travels inward to the true self, the nearer we come to that blissful state and this communion with all of life. So, previously I was talking about this longing, mumukshutva, this kind of longing for liberation, which has also been translated as love. There is this opening of the heart, and I think for someone like Annie Besant, with every failure or every new battle she had to fight, she had this resoluteness, she had this strength, and there was this something at a different level which was really helping to animate her. She had seen something, she had experienced something which led her along the pathway of this life, this extraordinary path. And despite, I think, periods of depression as well, there was also this joy in her heart deep inside. And perhaps also because if there's a real sense of rightness about what one is doing, there can be an inherent joy with that as well. Do you have any response to that thought? Sue and then Rosie.
Thank you. So you're saying that mumukshu ba, however you say that, is this joy, that level?
Well, I'm suggesting it's been translated as love in At the Feet of the Master. And I think when there is real love in the higher sense, there is an inherent kind of joy in that. There's kind of a bliss in that. Something which transcends happiness, which may be passing in physical life. Things come and go. Something makes us happy, we think, for a while, but that doesn't last. But this is something which is abiding, and I think the closer we come to our true self, the more it makes itself felt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seemed to me that love was a word that had such a personal context, and that bliss, or it just seems bigger than love. So thank you.
Yeah, I would qualify that though by talking about this more universal kind of love. It's like a love for all of life. It's not what we often think of as love, which is a far more limited thing. Yeah, thank you. Rosie.
Just the idea that this bliss, or this, I would think of it maybe as peace too, of the secret path, we can sort of juxtapose against what we saw earlier with the that existential angst of being human that we all sort of experience, but many of us, we know in the world today, are sort of sunk in the depths of darkness. They feel it, but they haven't gotten to the point where they can choose to take this path. So they are still in the darkness. Whereas this path is perhaps a path of woe, but there is this at least peace that comes with it.
Thank you. Susan.
Yeah, similar to what Rosie just said, I feel like if we didn't know that the truth of that, it would be very difficult to withstand the pain that we see. And because we do know we suffer that much less, but we suffer because they suffer. And if we have the answer, or we found the way beyond the suffering, we want to share that. We don't want to keep that to ourselves, because there's just so much ignorance and pain that the heart would break without trying everything to heal the sadness and the grief and the suffering that we see all around us. So we have to be able to see it, but also hold the joy and the beauty and the truth of it all at the same time, and allow our hearts to keep moving forward in spite of the suffering that's all around us.
Very nicely put, thank you. Yes, we need to hold fast to that, because life, physical incarnation is not an easy thing. For most people, it has its challenges, and those challenges are likely to be intensified along a path such as this. So we really do need to hold to that which is pulling us on, if we are really genuinely attracted to the Bodhisattva path, and remember sort of where we are headed. And it also requires a lot of strength, a lot of inner strength to do this. Jorge. I can't hear you.
You need to unmute, Jorge.
Okay, thanks. One of the conditions to enter the path is that of being unselfish. And to do so, we have to abandon analyze our desires and our wishes, which are mostly selfish, and in uprooting those and abandon our attachments, then we'll feel a lot lighter, and can bring us a sense of peace and abandonment and joy in life, because most of our desires will never bring us the desire, what we think is going to give us, is by abandoning those that we are happier than by trying to, I want this, I want that. And when we get it, they are not going to fulfill that peace that we're looking for.
That's right, absolutely. Thank you. Yes. All right. I think there can be a very deep sense of satisfaction when we take our minds off of ourselves for a while and actively give help in some way. We may not necessarily want anything from it, but sometimes there can be this strong inherent rightness of actually giving. And with that, maybe there is a kind of a joy as well. And I think Annie Besant spoke of with each new trial or with each difficulty that she had, there was a bit more joy each time. There was something she wrote to that effect, and I presume it must have been in her autobiography. But she had this something growing within her, which was quite remarkable. So it's a complete turnabout in so many ways, because we tend to live with reference to ourselves every day, even the smallest of things. What am I going to wear? What am I going to eat? Where am I going to go? What do I need to buy? All of these things that we're so self-referential, and yet we really need to learn to be so much more, if you like, other referential, to really more and more aware of the life around us. So little opportunities may come to help in some way, and they may just pass us by if we don't pay attention. It's as simple as that. So in this kind of life, it's a life of increasing awareness, learning to become more aware as we journey through each day. And each day is like a journey, really. So there is that. I want to talk also about pure love and the secret path. Pure love in its wider and deeper sense, and the utter unselfishness of the occultist, who's a disciple on the path, I would suggest are closely related. The pure heart ensures that one does not stray from the direction, if you like, of goodness, or what we refer to at times as the right-hand path as well. There's a lovely little phrase, there are many lovely phrases in the book, The Doctrine of the Heart. This one says, in the stormy darkness of the disciple's life, the sole light comes from love, for love and ananda, or bliss, are in the highest sense identical. Love and ananda are in the highest sense identical. So that light, there's that light that can keep us going in this kind of daily work on this Bodhisattva path, if this is something that we choose to do. So I thought that was a very nice one. And also mentioning love, a quote from Shankaracharya, who, on the quintessence of the Bhagavad Gita, what he regarded as the quintessence, he said, giving the self in love to me, with me as goal, doing all actions for me, the one life in all, devoid of all attachment to the forms, free from hostility to any being, man comes to me, O Arjuna. And that was quoted by Sri Krishna Prem in a chapter he wrote on the vision of the cosmic form that would have been in the Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a lovely book to really study. So yeah, it's again, he said this was the quintessence of the Gita. So the Gita is part of the body of Vedanta, and it's love. So this is very much, again, the heart doctrine. And the last thing I want to do is share with you what the voice of the silence has to say in one respect about compassion, and finish with the Kuan Yin pledge. So the voice in fragment 3 says, now bend thy head and listen well, O Bodhisattva. Got an extra S in there, please excuse that. Compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? Compassion speaks. So compassion speaking. Can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? So again, it's this very strong, if you like, calling to those who are receptive to the Bodhisattva path, to really become compassionate beings. Compassion is an incredibly strong theme. And so the Kuan Yin pledge that I want to finish with is a version which Joy Mills used in her book. There are different versions of this available, but this one just says, never will I seek nor receive private individual liberation. Never will I enter into final peace alone, but forever and everywhere will I live and strive for the liberation of every creature throughout all the worlds from the bonds of conditioned existence. seemed a fitting way to finish this session on the secret path. So I don't know if there are any more comments at this stage.
Linda, I have read, because we did our own program here, Maria and I, and actually at the moment I've forgotten who else joined us. But we did it on the Voice of the Silence. And I've read this line, oh, Peggy Hubel, that's right, Peggy Hubel. Thank you, Annie. I've read this line, now bend thy head and listen well, O Bodhisattva, compassion speaks. And I don't know what it is about it tonight, but I'm seeing it completely differently than I've seen it in the past. It has, for some reason, I'm reading it at a even deeper level than I read it before, which is extraordinary. But I think others have experienced this too. You can keep reading the Voice of the Silence over and over and studying it, and each time you see something different. And it's almost like it pierces the heart, and suddenly you have this understanding at a deeper level. So thank you for that.
This sort of verse could actually change an individual's life.
Mm.
Can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? It could cause someone to really wake up to some aspect of their life that they feel needs to be changed in some way, to be more in accord with that inner nature, the true self. Yes, Sue.
Thank you. So I just had a quick question about source. I think I wrote it down that you said the Bodhisattva level with initiation was the 7th, and the 8th was the Buddha. And where was that written? Was that Blavatsky, you said?
I think you'll find that in the Masters and the Path.
Oh,
C.W. Leadbeater.
okay. Thank you.
I guess there's a very great deal to reflect on when we think about this extraordinary way that a relatively small number of individuals might choose to take compared with the vast mass of humanity. It kind of sets something out before us to really consider. It's an invitation. The Voice of the Silence is like that. It's an invitation to us to open up more and away from this tremendous tendency that pretty well everybody has to be very self-absorbed, very self-centered in many ways, and to become more giving. And it's not limited to physical charity, giving of objects or anything else, but it's very much about the spirit in which we live our lives. Can we, when we have no other thoughts or tasks before us at a certain time, actually send out some positive thoughts either to the world or to individuals who we know need help? This is something which cannot be underestimated. We have this whole concept of thought power put before us in the vast corpus of theosophical teachings, but It's something we can remember. We read something like this, the Kuan Yin Pledge. We read a passage like this from the Voice of the Silence with compassion actually speaking. And perhaps this will cause us to think a little bit more about how we're living our lives, what we're doing. Is there something that could be incorporated into our lives each day, which could perhaps be enriching not for us, but for others, something we hadn't thought of before, something about our lifestyle which we might wish to change. But it's essentially a very deep turning around of the direction in which the mind is operating. A lot of the time, much of the time during the day, it is, as it were, downward turned, concerned with things to do with this physical world. But to actually turn that mind around and open it up and allow this true self to become more apparent can make a real difference. And HPV spoke in practical occultism, I think, about steeping ourselves in things divine, which is a phrase that has always really captured me. How do we steep ourselves? How do we immerse ourselves in things which are of a divine nature? It's something we can do very intentionally. Idamas?
Yes, I have a question. The second line of the Kuan Yin Pledge says, "Never will I enter into final peace alone." I thought, I don't understand this final business because I thought that life is forever and there's no end to anything, and evolution is always going to be working and changing things and so on. So what does it mean by final peace?
It might be a reference to nirvana.
But is nirvana final?
Well, maybe relatively speaking, and maybe for the human life way, it's relatively final, but I think there's more to it than that. Yes, Pablo.
Yes, we have to keep in mind that or interpret this in terms of the tradition where it comes from. So in Buddhism, there isn't the idea of evolution or an infinite evolution or anything like that. I think, as Linda was saying, for them, nirvana there are a couple of different nirvanas, but that's the final, the end. So we have to interpret it in that way and not in the theosophical way if it comes from another tradition.
That makes sense, Pablo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate the contributions of everybody and hope this has been helpful.
Thank you, Linda. It's left a lot to think about and just to ponder. So many beautiful things have been said. So I'd like to thank everyone this evening for joining us. And we have one more class left. Sadly, I feel quite sad. I feel like 4 is not enough. So, because I think there could be so many, this could go into, it could be pondered on in so many more classes in so many different ways. So, but thank you for, spending time with us and your contribution to all of this. This has been wonderful. So
it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And we have one more class left. So next week we will have the final presentation from Pedro. So please join us then. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.